Fred Rogers, who passed away, was a real genius. His own shows were led in 1941 through the late 1930s. Now we would love to show you, young YouTube audiences, to our second behind-the-scenes feature of Victor Sprenkle's Neighborhood, the man behind the masterpiece, Part 2. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I give you your host and narrator. Please welcome Academy Award nominee actor, Mr. Robert De Niro.
Victor Sprenkle. Victor Sprenkle. Now that's a name that'll go down in history books, you know? One of my heroes, a true legend. The man who took that mantle from Fred Rogers and put it on himself and took the whole enterprise to another level. Now today, we're going to go have some conversations with a couple Harvard types that happen to be experts on Fred Rogers and Victor Sprenkle. Doctors Jonathan Banks and
Nathan Stokes. We're coming, Mr. Narrator and
I guess
host.
we're waiting on Dr. Banks. He's a little late. Keeps his own schedule, you know?
Here I am.
Yeah, I think he's a Harvard.
And here is Mr. Nathan.
It's nice of you to join us, Dr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Narrator and host Robert De Niro.
So, what insight can you fine doctors offer us on the man behind the masterpiece, Victor Sprenkle?
Well, Robert De Niro, I'll start. I remember it in 1955 when the Fred Rogers decided to make his own shows in Pittsburgh. He married his new wife down in Pittsburgh, Miss Jody Rogers, and I remember how happy he was in the late 1950s, and he was so emotional and so blessed that he really had a goal for the education of children's television.
So you knew Fred Rogers personally?
Yes, back in the late 1960s, throughout the 1945.
Wow.
And now we get a word from Dr. Nathaniel Stokes, who has his instinct on both Victor Sprenkle's Neighborhood and Mr. Rogers. Take it away, Dr. Nathan.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here, especially in the presence of such a great actor, Robert De Niro.
Thank you.
You are indeed my favorite actor of all time.
Wow.
Having said, I knew Fred Rogers. I was his doctor when he was in the Navy SEALs. And he would come to me after every adventure that he was on, and we would make sure that he was still okay. And I was there when he married Jody, and I helped deliver their 3 children. Jody did it without C-section. She did natural childbirth, no medications, no nothing. Fred, on the other hand, had to be sedated. He was a sensitive man, in spite of having killed 17 people in the SEALs. But that's what I remember of Fred the most, was his falling apart at the birth of each of his children. And this is when I knew that he probably was going to do something with his life that would impact young children.
Robert, you may now continue your narration and then ask us 2 brilliant Harvard professors some more interview questions.
So, at last, some insight into Fred Rogers as a man who killed people with his bare hands as a Navy SEAL, and yet fainted at the sight of blood in the birthing room. A complicated man. A man of integrity and mystery. Quite a role for a young man like Victor Sprenkle to try to take over. Now for more on that, back to these 2 Harvard types.
Thank you, Mr. Robert De Niro, gifted narrator and host. Well, yes, I remember in the 1970s, when Mr. Rogers was playing several characters with puppets. I remember him playing King Friday, XBL, Harrietta Pussycat, Daniel Tiger, Queen Sarah, all these wonderful make-believe characters. And so I did the voice for each of these characters after Fred Rogers passed away. And one of my favorite characters that I played from him was King Friday, and his voice would sound something like this. Niece Aberlin, bass violin player, I presume. Almost correct as usual, King Friday. What do you mean by almost correct, Lady Aberlin? Well, I am Lady Aberlin, that's correct, but I am not a bass violin player, but that is a fine instrument that I have provided for you. It was made by excellent instrument makers. But Uncle Friday, just because somebody has a fine instrument doesn't mean that person can play it well. It's a good beginning, however. Now keep on practicing. Our bass violin festival will be in a few days. But Uncle Friday, no buts about it, Lady Aberlin. I will listen to you later in the day. And now, to my colleague, here's Nathan Stokes to give you more behind-the-scenes interviews.
Well, I was humbled to be the personal physician of Fred Rogers. And after his untimely passing, when I was contacted by Victor Sprenkle, who asked me if I would become his personal physician, I had to think twice, because I was getting on in years. By then, I was already 85 and had very much retired from the practice of medicine. But I knew with my Harvard education that I could probably handle Victor Sprenkle. And I knew it would be an honor to do so, and so I gladly accepted. And I've been his personal physician ever since, and may I say, he's made of tougher stuff than Fred Rogers. I've never seen him cry.
Wow.
Never, ever seen him cry. He's always there for his studio audience. And it's an honor.
Oh, okay, Robert, you get the last word, last words before we end our behind-the-scenes programming. You may tell that to our young audience, Mr. Narrator and Host.
Words I thought I'd never hear. Victor Sprenkle is tougher, made of tougher stuff than Fred Rogers. Now that is a revelation.
Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes. It's the kind of thing you only get on this type of program. Now to hear that this young man, Victor Sprenkle, who has taken over the show, is tougher than a former Navy SEAL who's killed 17 people in combat. I'll tell you, it gives me a whole new respect for the man. And I gotta say, he's done a fine job with the show. And you can tell he's got the heart of a lion. And I think that does it for this edition of The Man Behind the Masterpiece. I'm Robert De Niro, signing out.